Hello, everyone. This is Jed Schlackman. I'm a holistic counselor and spiritual energy healer. And for this particular video, I'll be speaking about the topic of sensitive versus insensitive and about breaking the cycle of bullying with self-empowerment for the sensitive and building empathy for the insensitive. We can think of different energetic polarities playing their roles in our reality. So a person who is sensitive tends to be a person who is very empathic, who is very tuned in to the feelings of others. And that person will often actually neglect to assert themselves or their own self-interest in order to appease or to address in some way the feelings or emotions of other people. On the other hand, you have people that you would look at perhaps as very insensitive. They are often labeled as narcissists, sometimes as sociopaths or psychopaths, when they seem to take that type of essence or attitude to an extreme, where they show absolutely no empathy for others or remorse for what other people might feel as a result of one's actions. So we could go even deeper to look at the roots of how people might develop these styles of interacting with others. So it could be traced back to early trauma, to a time in one's life when a person is in some way abused or mistreated. And in order to cope or adapt with that situation, the empath is someone who starts to become very tuned in to the emotional energies of other people so that they could either take proactive measures to protect themselves or take measures to somehow appease that other person, to respond in whatever way they think that other person desires for them to, so that that person will perhaps stop abusing them. Whereas the person who develops the insensitive, the more narcissistic type approach, that individual might be learning to detach from feelings and emotions because they really don't want to feel or experience their own pain of having been disempowered or abused. So they develop this detachment from emotions where they feel they can maintain their own sense of balance and their own energy by not being concerned about other people's feelings and only focusing on what they feel meets their own needs or desires. They may also be taking on the role of the abuser or perpetrator to feel a sense of empowerment. So if they can be detached from emotions and use that to manipulate other people's emotions, it gives them some feeling of power or control, which they lacked when they experienced the domineering or abuse from someone else in their own environment when they were young. These could be some of the core dynamics, core patterns that lead to these different polarizations. Whether or not we can trace back those particular patterns for an individual person, we want to explore how we deal with these situations that arise as people go through life. And there are often different bullying type dynamics or situations that occur. And there are things that need to be addressed in order to help each of the individuals involved break free or transcend this cycle. If we consider the law of attraction metaphysically, a person who is stuck in being, in a sense, the victim, feeling that they're being emotionally traumatized or bullied, and they don't get beyond that identification or that sense of self, then they'll often continue to attract, so to speak, more of those types of experiences. They'll continue to encounter other people who will dominate or bully them in some way, bringing up the same emotions, the same feeling of disempowerment. So if we want to help end this type of cycle, we want to look at what we could do to address both individuals who are involved in the polarity dynamic. How do we help the sensitive person feel more self-empowered or more secure within themselves and less vulnerable to the efforts by another person to tease or bully them, to trigger their emotions? And also for the person who is doing the bullying, how do we help them start to develop some empathy, some compassion or concern for how other people feel? Often the approaches that are employed don't really bring about the solutions that are desired. They may be unintentionally perpetuating these patterns. So let's take an example of a child who's in a school environment. It's a sensitive child, and that child seems to be a magnet for other children, for peers around him or her, to start teasing and name-calling and bullying, doing things of that nature that trigger that feeling of disempowerment, that make that child feel like they're the victim in some sense. Well, there could be a policy adopted where everyone is told there's zero tolerance for any sign of bullying, where a child who feels they're being bullied should immediately alert the adults or authority figures there so that those adults can step in and provide some type of discipline or punishment, so to speak, for those that are doing the bullying. Here comes the challenge with this. If those who are bullies have an issue with people imposing their will upon them, of punishing them, of making them feel like they're bad, there's something wrong with them, then if now you have adults again coming and playing that type of power over role, stepping in to say your behavior is bad and you're going to have to face an unpleasant consequence for it, that's not actually teaching the bully to have empathy, to have concern for the feelings of the other children or students. It's just imposing some type of a fear-based discipline where the bully may comply because they don't want to be bullied, they don't want to have some punishment or negative consequence delivered. So they'll perhaps appease the adults, and when they think the adults are paying attention, they'll play by those rules and limit that bullying behavior, but they haven't really changed internally. Their same emotional dynamics are present, and once they get out of that environment, or once they think that the authority figures aren't watching and monitoring, they'll often just revert back to the same bullying behaviors. So a more ideal approach would be to reinforce the expected behaviors, to remind them of how they are expected to treat other students, but also to provide some teaching and educational opportunities or interventions to help them develop some compassion, some appreciation for the feelings of others, perhaps giving some prompts to help them stop and describe what they think the other children may be feeling or experiencing in various situations or scenarios, and also to help the bully perhaps recall or identify a time in their own life when they may have felt or experienced that same type of emotion, that same type of reaction or sensation. If you can help them recall or revisit a time when they themselves were feeling bullied, abused, or mistreated in some manner, and having that emotional experience, having whatever feelings were present arise, then you're helping them connect to feelings, to emotions, and helping them start to build that skill, even if it's just through identifying their own feelings or emotions, acknowledging what they themselves have been through. In order to promote some type of long-term healing process, it is really important to help those who are acting as the bullies or abusers to start to connect to those feelings or emotions rather than suppressing or disconnecting from them. Now we can also bring our attention to the child in those scenarios who is the apparent victim or on the other end of the bullying experience. The child who is sensitive, who's being taunted, who's being called names, who's being in some way triggered to feel that they're not in a state of empowerment, that their own self-worth is under attack in some manner. For that child, it's really important to help them build their own self-worth and self-confidence, to have a sense of their own being that is not brought down in whatever manner by someone trying to taunt them, to pick on them, and so on. Part of this power dynamic involves the reality that the bully senses who is sensitive, who they can manipulate emotionally in that manner, and they naturally will start to play that role with that person. So if a person is more centered in their own being, more self-confident, if they're in a sense immune to the bully, if they don't have a strong emotional reaction when someone calls them names or tries to make them feel emotionally disempowered, then that starts to break the cycle. If the bully doesn't get the attention, if they don't trigger the reaction, then they'll start to lose interest in interacting with that person. So it can help to train the child who's the quote-unquote victim of bullying to realize how this dynamic unfolds and to learn to be more grounded and centered, more at ease within oneself, and less reactive. This may be challenging at first, but you can develop that skill, that awareness over time. And once this is mastered more, typically you'll find that that child becomes much less targeted by those who are bullies, who are looking to play upon and manipulate the emotions of someone else. So building that strength and stability within the so-called hypersensitive person is another part of this. And unfortunately, if the authority figures are always stepping in to protect and rescue that child, if they always take action to pull the bully away and discipline or punish the bully, and don't give the child who's been the sensitive one, the victim, to exercise their skills at maintaining their own energy, their own emotional equilibrium, then that child won't have the opportunity to really develop that skill. So if we become too protective, too eager to keep anyone from being at the end of a bully's aggression, then we may be keeping children from developing skills they'll need to kind of stand on their own, to maintain their own ability to deal with those who may be acting as bullies and narcissists and so on. So it's possible to be overprotective, to take too much action in intervening in those situations, and not let children learn to handle some things on their own. So this is where balance is important, where we want to address the imbalances that are present with all the children that are involved in those scenarios. And then of course this progresses to adult interactions as well. We want to help adults who are imbalanced in these different ways to develop more balance within themselves. It's actually easier usually to address these issues when people are still very young, when they're children, when the patterns haven't been as deeply ingrained. But even when people are adults, you can start to address these patterns, whether it's the extreme sensitivity or the extreme insensitivity. I hope that this explanation has given each of you some things to ponder, some things to consider. These are not simple, easy issues to address. There isn't really a perfect formula to apply, since each individual is somewhat unique, and we may need to adapt or shift our approaches to address the unique needs of each individual or group that we're interacting with. So if we can be more tuned into the consciousness of whomever we may be working with, we can start to perceive their patterns, their strengths and weaknesses, the motivations perhaps that underlie their behaviors and their social patterns. And we could start to take steps to apply interventions that will help them start to evolve, that will help them shift toward becoming a more balanced person. I hope that this has been beneficial, and I appreciate each of you for your time in watching this video. For those that are interested in holistic health and spirituality, I invite you to watch some more of my videos on these topics. And you can also visit my website, which is phinsights.com. That's PHINSIGHTS.com. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.